Welcome to Spacevidcast for July 24th, 2009. My name is Benjamin Higginbotham. With me is beautiful, lovely, wonderful, talented, and incredibly intelligent Carrie Ann Higginbotham. We are your Spacevidcasters. We have got an awesome packed epicsode for you tonight. We've got Michael Potter, the director and producer of Orphans of Apollo. He'll be on in just a second. Yep, check that out. And halfway through the show, before we go to break, we've got a Twitter trivia. You can win this signed copy, this signed DVD of Orphans of Apollo. So stay with us and check that out in the middle of the show. But before we do that, a couple housekeeping cleaning items. We have grown to be quite a large community, which is both good.
We're fat.
We're fat. It's good, but it comes with some side effects, and that is we starting to get quite a few trolls, and we need to do a little bit more moderation in our live chat room. And as such, we are having our first ever elections for Spacevidcast. We're electing 3 IRC operators. They will serve a 6-month term, and if you would like to be an IRC operator, you'll need to email me, benjamin@spacevidcast.com, before the 31st.
Yes, July 31st.
Before July 31st. Get your name in there, and then we will start the election process on August 1st. Mm-hmm. And we'll give you all the details on how you can vote for someone. You can vote for 3 people, preferably not the same person 3 times, but we don't really have any way to prevent you from doing that, so you can vote for whomever you want.
That's good. Why don't you tell them that?
Whatever.
Game the system, everybody.
Exactly. Here's how you can game it. So, yeah, we'll get those details for you in the blog section of Spacevidcast, so watch for that on
August for the win.
August 1st.
Yes.
On that note, like I said, we've got Michael Potter from the Orphans of Apollo joining us live via Skype. Michael, welcome to Spacevidcast.
Greetings.
So let's start off a little bit with your past. This isn't the first thing you've done. You've got a little bit of a business background, is that correct?
Well, yes. I mean, I call myself the reluctant director, the reluctant filmmaker, the reluctant executive producer. I mean, basically, my background is business. And one day I woke up and I said, this is a story that really has to be told. And I tried to persuade another very famous documentary filmmaker into doing Orphans of Apollo. And, he had so many hoops he wanted me to go through. At the end of the day, I said, I'm just going to do it myself. And, some people have talked about this as being the greatest space story never told. And I'm shocked about how many people, even people who are experts in the space community, who have never heard this story before.
What's interesting is actually, and we'll talk about the story a little bit later itself, but I had actually never heard this story either, and I do a weekly space show. I mean, I knew about the Mir and I knew about us bringing it down, but there's a lot that went on with that whole thing.
Well, and stupid me, I was thinking Mir. I'm like, wasn't that thing in like the 70s or something? Like, I had no concept of when it was up and when it was active and when it was deorbited. I just was like, totally, no clue.
Well, I mean, and that history is important because really it's 60s technology, which they started building in 1986, and they took down in 2001. But the remarkable thing is that the Russian contribution to ISS is essentially Mir 2, and Mir lives on, and it's the core of the 300-ton International Space Station.
How did you get to starting to do this? I mean, the idea must have come from somewhere. Are you just a space geek and said, this is a story I have to tell, or where did this come from?
So it came from two things. One is, yes, I'm a space geek, but the second thing is that I was 1 degree of separation from most of the players in the story. And that was also one of the ironies, because I thought I knew the story, and then when I started to dig into it, I realized that I didn't know it. And in some ways that was even more inspirational for moving me forward and inspired me to finish the project, because I thought, oh, this is something that's so predictable, I already knew it, I'm 1 degree of separation from it. I felt like I had always been given continual updates throughout the project.
Right.
And then when I went back, 9 years later, I realized that there were just a lot of things that I had missed as I lived vicariously through the mere corp existence.
Interesting.
Interestingly enough, it's called Orphans of Apollo. Tell me a little bit about that name. Did you feel like the Apollo program orphaned you? Where did that title come from?
So basically, it came from one of the main characters in the film, Rick Tumlinson, and when he describes, the United States government, that they went to the moon, and basically, he described the Cold War scenario. I mean, it was a space race, and the United States won, in a sense, the sprint. We won the space race, we won the sprint, and then we basically surrendered. In 1972, Nixon shut down the Apollo program, and basically an entire generation of people who had been promised that humans would be living and working on the moon, we all felt orphaned. I mean, we had accepted the government's position on that. And I think this generation of, those people involved with the new space revolution, people like Richard Branson and people like, Burt Rutan and people like Elon Musk, these are people that said, look, the government is probably not competent to do this. And not only that, the government persuaded us that this was our future, and we accepted it. Now we're just going to go do it ourselves.
You had written an article not that long ago talking about NASA's brand and how it's kind of been, they built up this amazing brand around space travel, and then they just kind of let it go. And now, I mean, NASA used to stand for integrity, courage, being able to do the impossible, and now it kind of stands for, spending lots of money and
A lot of red tape.
A lot of red tape. Do you think that's something they can repair? Can they get their brand back at this point?
Yeah, I wrote a piece also about the great moon hoax, and it's not the moon hoax as the Apollo 11 landing never happened. Of course, it happened, and then not only that, it was a pinnacle of human history. It was a pinnacle of NASA's existence. But I think that the key thing is that it wasn't sustainable. We went up there; it was a spasm of energy, and then we pulled back, and then we started the space shuttle program, and we started the space station, that was the critical thing, is that we surrendered. We in a sense withdrew from our efforts on the moon. And so my question is, when it's the 40th anniversary of celebrating Apollo, what are we celebrating? Are we celebrating the fact that we gave up? Are we celebrating that we surrendered? And so, like in the military, they talk about, this is a retreat, or in PR speak, they say this is a redeployment. And I don't feel like that's what we should be celebrating. In some ways, it's a very solemn occasion, particularly since we surrendered. It's like the funeral of a great human being, somebody who contributed a lot to the planet, and we should be very solemn and serious. And if you want really, energized celebrations, then we should be celebrating going back and doing it seriously and doing it to stay, and not this kind of setback that we had after the Apollo program.
But it's not just NASA. Anyone in the world, including Russia, could have gone back to the moon. Someone could have kept the program going, but I think collectively as the entire world feels like it dropped the ball. Why does it have to be NASA? Why does it have to be us that goes back? Or doesn't it?
Well, so I mean, the current space policy at NASA, which is George W. Bush laid out the policy of return to the moon and then going on to Mars, human habitation on Mars. So the big question is, will that strategy change? I think it's doable, but the precondition should be: is it logical? Is it efficient? And can we do it in a sustainable way? If the answer is we can't do both of those things, if we can't do Moon and we can't do Mars in a sustainable way, and then there's going to be choices that will be imposed on NASA. There'll be choices imposed on NASA by Congress. And I think that NASA, one of the biggest challenges it now faces, is that if it doesn't get its own house in order, if it can't come up with a logical, compelling strategy, then Congress will impose its will. And so if I were NASA at this moment, I would be trying to figure out how are we going to be more focused about what we do, how are we going to prevent so many of the projects from spiraling out of control, because this is the moment, particularly in this climate of budget cuts, that NASA has to get control of its own destiny.
But don't they have to start taking some more risk too? They seem to be a little bit risk averse now, whereas with Apollo 11 or of the Apollo program, they're willing to take much more risk.
Well, and this goes back to your point about the NASA brand. which is that it was almost like the battle cry of "Remember the Alamo." When everybody remembers the phrase that says that failure is not an option. And that in the Apollo era, that was a battle cry. That was something that was inspiring. That was something that was motivating. But then somehow that trickled down into the bureaucracy. And in the post-Apollo era, failure is not an option became a very risk-averse, which means no matter what, you can't have any incident. And the problem with that is that you pile on so many layers of paperwork, and you pile on so many billions of dollars of investment in infrastructure that actually it increases the chance of failure. So I think that that's the problem with the NASA brand. And I think any great brand, if you look at Disney, if you look at Coke, these are brands that people protect, and they get very rigid and very brittle, and they don't want to take risks. But I think that the NASA that we remember, the NASA that we want to return, has to take risks. Not that we want failure, but we just want new layers of success. And I think the Indians and I think the Chinese are countries that are willing to take slightly more calculated risks. They don't want disasters, they don't want to fail, but they're willing to take risks.
But does it belong in the hands of government at all? If NASA, or excuse me, if space exploration is the big, huge next economy that a lot of us space enthusiasts are saying it is, then why can't privatized travel figure out how to make money there? Why can't private companies figure out how to make money on the moon and forge that frontier themselves?
Well, and I think that's exactly the point, which is I think it can be, but it's going to be done in an economic development model, which is that NASA they have a political consensus on resources and funding, and I think that should be leveraged in the private sector. And one of the points I made was that in the recent stimulus package, NASA was given $1 billion, but $1 billion into a federal bureaucracy becomes worth less than $1 billion. But $1 billion being invested into small businesses, into medium-sized businesses, sort of more like the DARPA model, that's when you start to get exponential returns. And so I think NASA's got to move away from this kind of negative bureaucratic returns to these highly leveraged entrepreneurial returns. So I agree with you. I think NASA does have a role, and it has a role that should be very, very similar to the DARPA role. But at the end of the day, I think private industry has a critical role, and I think together, government with government funding, working closely together with private industry to get the maximum impact, can really create this sustainable model that we're all looking for.
So 2 points the chat room is making. One, they love Kid in the background. They think he's adorable. is that your son, or is that who do we have joining us?
That's Rocket Man. That's Rocket Man Sam, who is not really supposed to be dancing around in the background.
Adds to the fun part of the show. Welcome to Internet Television.
He was like the child that was home, left alone at home, and now he's gone wild.
You know what? I completely forgot the second question they asked. Hold on.
In the chat.
The second question was, and I kind of know the answer to this, but let me half answer it and then get your opinion on it. And someone said in the chat room, well, isn't that what Virgin Galactic is doing when we were talking about building economies on the moon? And the thing with Virgin Galactic is their suborbital flight. And that's actually a point I want to bring up. These private companies, I don't know of any of them that are actually looking to go to the moon themselves. SpaceX isn't, Virgin Galactic isn't, Armadillo isn't, and X-Corp isn't.
Right. So, but all of them have learned the lessons of MirCorp, which was MirCorp was not that enthusiastic about working with governments. In fact, MirCorp didn't really trust the governments. But if you look at SpaceX today, Elon has been smart about things. He knows that the government is a necessary partner to do business. You don't want them to snuff out your program with hopeless amounts of bureaucracy, but you want to take the government need for cargo and the need to get passengers, and you want to use those as a paying customer. And even Virgin Galactic, yes, they're suborbital, but they've gone to the state of New Mexico and they work with the local government in terms of building spaceports. So almost everybody is looking at this kind of mixture of private and public sector partnerships, but almost everybody does it. You see that in the with FedEx, they have governments as anchor tenants and even many of the airlines and air transportation companies. So it's a normal way of doing business, but it's not a normal way in terms of the 40 years of experience we've had with NASA, which is why I think it's partly, having the problems that it's having today.
All right, Michael, we're going to put you on hold for a second as we go into break. And when we come back, we're going to be talking about your movie, The Orphans of Apollo. But before we do that, we've got a Twitter trivia question for you this week. And this week's question is...
Oh, really?
Yeah, well, you wrote the question, and I don't remember the question.
Well, it's written in the thing. That's why we have
I don't have that open, though.
Well, right
what
there.
spacecraft re-entry resulted in a multi-million-dollar fine imposed by Canada against the Soviet Union? Tweet your answer to @SpaceVidcast for a chance to win this signed DVD copy of Orphans of Apollo. You've got approximately 90 seconds to do it. The winner will be randomly chosen. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Espresso drinks, delicious food, live music, bulk beans, and artisan items. You can see us at crowrivercoffee.com. Thanks.
Government spent billions of dollars going to the moon. They got there, and just as they got there, everybody got color television sets, and they got to the moon. It was pretty well black and white.
1972, Apollo 17, last mission on the moon, and during the Nixon administration, shut it down.
We, as Apollo's children, felt we were Apollo's orphans. We had been left out in the cold.
It was over in the government's minds, but a lot of young kids there, myself included, were ready for what was next.
The right chemistry, the right mix, the right matrix of people, of vision, wealth, courage, a little bit of craziness, okay, a whole lot of craziness, teamed up and said, let's go do something important. Let's change the future.
Walt pulled together an ad hoc group of people that he knew, and it wasn't so much company, it was more kind of entourage.
It was like they came out of a band.
Here we were, going to negotiate a deal to open a frontier in a place that felt like a frontier at the time.
Here you had a serious situation to take over the manned space station.
Would you like a space station? Because I think we can get it. We had a mega business plan that was going to grow into probably the biggest business plan ever.
The audacity of leasing a 130-ton space asset and privatizing it is the realm of science fiction.
Pressure was incredible. The Russians were being squeezed hard by the United States government to take the Mir out.
Gus said, you're a doomed man if you do this. They are going to come after you with everything they got.
When we went to break, we asked you what spacecraft re-entry resulted in a multi-million-dollar fine imposed by Canada against the Soviet Union. And a lot of you tweeted in your answers. Most of you guessed.
That was very funny.
I have Mir as an answer. That is not correct. I have Cosmos 917 as an answer. That is not correct. I've got Skylab multiple times. That is not correct. However, the winner of our signed copy of Orphans of Apollo is the NASA man with Cosmos 954. What's the general story behind that one?
The idea is, and I'm sure somebody will correct me because I'm sure I will get this wrong, is pretty much what it comes down to. My understanding is that there had been something of Russia's that they went to deorbit and it hit Canada. And Canada was like, look, you have one try. That's it. You hit us again and we are finding you. And Russia was like, yeah, no problem, because they didn't think they were going to do that again. So they went to deorbit 954 and it was, sure enough, bam! And Canada was like, we have a paper that says you owe us $3 million. Thank you very much. And Russia was like, oh, all right, fine. So there you go. The NASA man, congratulations. Your signed copy of Orphans of Apollo DVD will be sent out to you later tomorrow. It is an awesome movie, and we've got with us the director and producer of Orphans of Apollo, Michael Potter. Tell us a little bit about the story of Orphans of Apollo, because it sounds, when you listen to the title itself, it sounds like it's going to be about the Apollo program itself, but really it's not. It really is about right after that and the people that had orphaned.
That's exactly right. So it's basically these people that were inspired by Apollo and then felt that the government wasn't going to get anything accomplished in space. And so if they want to have an impact in terms of space development, they would have to do something bold. And that bold thing was to go out and lease the space station Mir and try to open it up to do scientific research and to also open it up as a hotel and turn it into a commercial enterprise. And it was, and one of the pieces of trivia, maybe for another show and maybe for another gift, is that very few people on the planet know that these guys were the people that sent the first private astronauts or first private cosmonauts up to a private orbital space facility.
Has that happened since? Well, I suppose it has, because we've had... Go ahead.
Yes, we have Anushan Sari, and we have had the space adventurers who are the civilian space astronauts who have gone up, and we've had 6 or 7 of those.
Now, they went out to check it out. You mentioned using it as a space hotel, and I've seen some interior shots of the Mir, and I just can't imagine using the Mir as a space hotel. Was that actually going to be a viable business at that point?
Well, everybody said it was impossible, it was ridiculous. Nobody would pay $20 million to go to an orbital space facility. And in fact, Dennis Tito signed an agreement and put money in escrow, and he intended to go. Unfortunately, when it became obvious that the Mir was going to be deorbited, the Russians and Space Adventures ended up grabbing a hold of the Dennis Tito contract and then moving him to the International Space Station.
Talk to me a little bit about Mir Corp. Again, we're a space show. We talk about human spaceflight every week. Now, we look forward more than we look backward, so it's not terribly surprising we hadn't heard of Mir Corp, but I had never heard of them. I mean, this is... I was alive during that time, and I don't remember Mir Corp at all. Who were they? What were they trying to do?
So basically, it was a small team. It was sort of a band of brothers, and it was kind of a distributed virtual team. People lived in all different countries. In fact, one of the other great secrets is that Mir Corp was actually a Dutch-based company. So they were a Dutch-based company with they had executives based in Los Angeles, and they were trying to work on a reality television show, which was going to be kind of a Survivor, where the winners would end up at the Mir space station.
Awesome.
And one of the great financiers, Walt Anderson, was based on the East Coast. And of course, you had Energy and the Russians based in Moscow. So it was an extremely small company. It was a band of brothers, highly motivated, highly passionate about this, who wanted to get this project to work. But that's also what made it interesting from a documentary point of view, because these people had such distinct and exciting personalities, and that was one of the hardest parts of the film. is that they're all incredibly articulate. And when you actually had to go down, and we created two versions of the film. We have a 52-minute main feature, and then we have an extended feature, which is 76 minutes. But to take the 30-some hours of interviews down to that point of view, and cutting out all the beautifully articulate, insights and phrases and conversations, was a very difficult thing, and particularly for a first-time film editor.
Have you done anything since Orphans of Apollo? This is a fairly new movie. I mean, came out like March of this year, didn't it? Something like that?
So yeah, so basically it's just gone to DVD, and it was just put on Amazon 2 days ago.
Nice.
And,
there you go.
Yeah, so it's a brand new movie. But the project I'm currently working on is the working title is called 10 to the 9th, and the Singularity University, which is at NASA Ames this summer, and also the International Space University is being held at NASA Ames. But the design project for the Singularity University is a design project for the postgraduate students to try to figure out how do you positively impact 1 billion people in 10 years, and hence the working title 10 to the 9th. And that's the current documentary that Free Radical Productions and a talented team of people are working on.
Is this something you're going to continue down? Did you enjoy the documentary portion of Orphans, and you want to just keep making documentaries?
Well, I do have to tell you that these sort of projects, and I think many of our listeners and viewers know, that you find a project like this, of course, it's more a labor of love, but it's sort of like quicksand. It grabs you by the leg, and then it starts to pull you down. And so you really have to be careful when you do these sort of projects. So I'm going to continue to try to have an impact on important science and technology and international issues. But I'll probably never describe myself as a full-time documentary filmmaker.
Well, we watched this earlier this week, and it was very well done, very well produced. It was incredibly insightful. Certainly loved watching it. I would say that any space geek should definitely pick this up and watch the story of MirCorp and what happened along the way, because there's just tons of stuff that happened I had no idea about. And what was really interesting is, you mentioned earlier in the show kind of how they didn't really want to work with the government, but I find that odd because they didn't really have a choice. I mean, Mir was owned by the Russian government. So... Right,
but it was Energia who they cut the deal with, and Energia was essentially a private enterprise. And there were people in the government the Russian government that wanted to keep the thing going, but it was obvious from the United States point of view, the United States wanted to have the monopoly in space, and these guys came in, and for $7 million, next to nothing, $7 million, they took control. They commandeered a 150-ton space asset, and the U.S. government had a few issues with it, and these were issues that they could never have imagined when the MirCorp executives were putting together the MirCorp business plan. But the first thing is that the United States never thought Congress would fund a $100 billion space station if they had an example in the newspaper of these guys buying a $7 million space station. So NASA said, this thing's got to go because we'll never get funding for the $100 billion space station. And you can see from a bureaucratic point of view, there's a certain logic in all that, although, you have to feel some sense of outrage and compassion for these entrepreneurs who are blindsided by that. And the second thing was that the International Space Station, and again, this is where I feel that I was naive, and being a space expert, I thought I knew a great deal about a lot of these issues. But the International Space Station was fundamentally an arms control project. And what happened is, after the collapse of the Berlin Wall, and after the collapse of communism, the Russians ran into an incredible economic catastrophe. And in order to raise funds, they cut a deal with India for a $450 million missile project to transfer technology to India. And the United States didn't want this to happen. So what they did, they went back to the Russians and they said, look, unwind the deal with the Indians, and we'll let you build the core module of the International Space Station, and we'll pay you $450 million. And once again, this was something that the executives of MirCorp, when they put together all the risk factors and all the probabilities of success with their project, that was something that never came across their mind.
So if MirCorp was to be born today, Do you think it would be successful? Let's look at the International Space Station as a model instead of Mir. We're kind of looking at going back to the moon. People are questioning what we're going to do with the ISS. If some private company came along and said, I want to make this happen, I want to buy the ISS, do you think that would be a doable business model today, or is that just something that will never work when government involved like that?
So I think with ISS, they're currently talking about getting rid of the 300-ton, $100 billion facility in 2016. They're talking about getting rid of it, which is probably going to be a complicated thing since they have many, many European partners, and they have the Japanese partners, and they have the Russian partners.
Right.
So that could be a difficult proposition, but that's the current intention. And by the way, nothing adds up. You can't talk about going to the moon and going to Mars and keeping ISS and trying to build new launch vehicles. So in the next few weeks, we're all waiting with bated breath, trying to figure out if there's actually going to be an articulated, sustainable strategy that actually makes sense and that actually adds up mathematically. But I think that if today, if NASA said, we're willing to take bids from a qualified player in the industry, so that's somebody that presumably has billions of dollars on their balance sheet to take over ISS, nobody would pay $1. Nobody would pay a single dollar for that. However, in 2016, if they're talking about deorbiting the space station, is there a possibility that a tether, just like the MirCorp strategy, could you put a tether and somehow extend the life of the International Space Station? Can you put it up in a storage orbit to deal with it later? Is there a way that all 300 tons of that extremely valuable material and that incredible asset, is there ways to keep that in space, maybe make it available for the moon? And I think that's where all the thinking's starting to go. And I think that's one of the magical things about the documentary is that that's the battle cry. People are saying, look back at the MirCorp example. Let's start thinking ahead. Let's not wait till the day before they announce plans to deorbit ISS, and let's try to do something. And so people already have started to get together and starting to try to figure out, how do you unlock this puzzle? How do we save this incredible asset rather than just dumping it into the ocean, which is what NASA is proposing to do.
So where can...
Assuming they don't hit Canada and have to owe another
That's right, another $3 million. Where can people go to buy a copy of Orphans of Apollo?
So if you go to Amazon, you can buy a copy of that. It's also available at www.Orphans of Apollo, and you can buy it through the website. So feel free. I think there's a few versions that are on eBay currently. So you got a few different possible outlets, depending on whether people want to use Google Checkout or PayPal, or whether they like their Amazon account.
Nice.
Awesome. And remember, guys, don't steal it. Don't try to torrent it, because I saw someone mention that in the chat room. You got to buy the DVD. It helps.
You guys make it sound like it's like a $400 DVD.
No,
like
it's
like $20. Like, come on. I don't understand.
This isn't some large mega corporation that put this together. This is independently produced. This is all you. This is your work. And so certainly,
if we want to continue doing films that profile the new space revolution, and then we certainly encourage. And this is the ultimate, indie film. This is not a film that the government wants. This is not the film that NASA wants. This is a film that just a bunch of independent, hardcore, space entrepreneurs and space enthusiasts want. So, and by the way, the film is $11.99, but by the time you add in postage and everything else, it gets closer to $20.
I suppose, but yeah, $11.99. If you've got Amazon Plus or Amazon whatever, you could probably get it on free shipping or.
So for everyone,
come on, $12, you guys can do this. I know you can.
With the exception of the NASA man who won this signed copy, I would suggest that everyone in the chat room pick up their copy of Orphans of Apollo. Like I said, it was a fantastic story, extremely well told. Definitely, I actually really like the animations in there as well. It has kind of a Battlestar Galactica feel to it.
A little bit, yeah.
It's extremely well put together, and it's just a great story and a great documentary. Michael, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
What an honor.
All right, next week.
Yes.
We've got tons of news.
Tons of news, because we didn't do any this week.
So you guys get your news fill next week, and we will be doing this live Friday at 2 o'clock a.m. Coordinated Universal Time. That's Thursdays in the United States, 7 p.m. Pacific, 9 Central, 10 o'clock Eastern. Thank you guys so much for joining us. The chat room, you guys were awesome. I know, no space news. I'm sorry, guys. You get that next week. Lots and lots
extra,
and lots
we'll
of space news.
We'll just throw in the intro like a lot.
Yeah, between every space news item.
Yes.
Space news, space news, space news.
So you'll have your fill.
Stay with us for post-show. We'll see you next week.